Now that we've added Bootstrap, we are now going to create our mobile layout. And remember, we're going to do mobile first because it's actually easier doing the mobile layout than the computer layout. We'll deal with the computer layout next week when we add those columns that sit side by side in. So we're in CodePen. We have added the Bootstrap link in the HTML stuff for head, so we know that we've got all of those classes available to us. In this demo document, we don't have anything in the CSS yet. I haven't added all the stuff you would have been adding over the weeks, just so that you can see it much more cleanly and you can add your own CSS if you are forking this. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is put all the content in a container. So there I have to create a div. Now a div is it's a tag that has no intrinsic meaning. It's not semantic. It is not telling the browser, oh, this is the most important heading, or oh, this is a paragraph. It's just saying this is a section of what's on the screen, and then you can add a class to it or an ID. You add the CSS basically to style it, to give it some context within the page. So you see I've started with a div up the top left. I might zoom in on this actually so you can see it a bit easier. It means you can't see the website underneath, unfortunately. In fact, I'll close that ad so we have a little bit more room. But you can see I've started with a div up the top. I'm going to give it a class equal, two S's, class equals container. Make sure I've only got one closing pointy bracket there. And then I need to have a corresponding one down the bottom of my document. It's really important to remember that these divs have to be nested like little Russian nesting dolls, the Matryoshka dolls. You can't have them overlapping. So we have a container around everything, and we will already see that this has made a difference. So if I go to my full page view, you can see that we've actually got it indented a bit. Actually, we can see there's a problem already. And that's good because I can show you what has caused this, because I'll guarantee there'll be a few people with this problem. So why is my container not fitting within the page? It's because of my images. So I want all of those images to be 100% of the width of whatever div they are in. Now you might not be able to apply it to all images on the page if you're using some smaller ones for different purposes such as social media, but I am going to put img width 100%. So it's img squiggly bracket width colon 100% semicolon, and then you end the squiggly bracket. And now if I go and view this, it should fit within my page. There we go, much better. So this has actually resized these images that were too big for the column. So you should have yours optimized for the web, but they might not be the exact width of your columns, so it's a good idea to set those images to 100% wide. You can either use that with the img image selector, or you can add classes to these images if you want some of them to be 100% wide and others to be different sizes. But we can see everything fitting in here nicely, and this is with the div class container surrounding all of the content. Now, one thing that you will note here, if I just shrink this, you see how it sort of it jumps between sizes. Container is more of a fixed width approach. Another alternative you could do, if it suits you, is container-fluid. And if I save that, we go have a look at the full page view, it's now 100% of the width, and if I resize this, you can see how it is literally fluid. It goes by percentage width. So it just depends on what you prefer with your design. If you want a combination of it, if you want it to be fluid and resized, but you want it, for instance, to be 80% of the width, post in the discussion forum. I can give you additional code for that, but that's a bit more advanced. So you may want to stick with container fluid or container. Container is probably the easier of the two. So I'm going to go into my code and change it back to container just to make it easier for everyone to follow. But you do have the choice between container and container fluid. Okay, so we've put the container on it. Next we do the rows. So let's revisit our layout. We have a row for the heading. We have a row for the next section of text. We have another row that has 2 columns with images sitting side by side. And then we have a row with this content down here. So I just need to style all of these accordingly by putting a div with row around it here, a div with the class row here, a div with the class row surrounding this content, a div with the class row surrounding this content, and a div with the class row surrounding the bottom footer. Okay, so let's go in and find where all these rows are. I'll have a look at my full page so I can see my content and identify it. So this is my H1. This will be in a row. This is the blurb underneath. I'll put that in another row. I accidentally put 3 images and content in. I've removed that so we've only got 2 to match the layout. Oops. So this image, subheading and content will be one of the columns within the next row. We've got the other column that would normally sit side by side, so I'm going to be putting that in the same row. Then I have this for another row, and I have this as my footer. Okie dokie. So let's go and add this content. So remembering all rows need to be in the container, all content needs to be in a column which is in a row. So we put our first row immediately after div class equals container. So it is div class equals row. And I just want my H1 in that. So I'll just go enddiv. Okay. Then I want my subtitle and this H3 section to be in the next row. Div class equals row. You'll be typing this a lot, trust me. And then after the end H3, end div. We want the 2 images and their respective content to be in the next row. Div class equals row. So I'll just go after that information. So here's our second image. So that'll be the second column. Here we go. Second column subheading. More information about this section. Paragraph. Okay, awesome. So that end div ends the row. And then we start our next one, div class equals row, and this is for that little single column sitting below those 2 columns. We've got some, probably don't need this. Sorry, I'm just going to delete that content that's unnecessary. Div, end div. And then finally we want our row that is the footer. So div class equals row, and I better save soon. And just before the other end div, I will put another end div. Now, it can be pretty confusing with all of these divs and end divs. So what you can also do is have a look. If you click on this, you see how it underlines the corresponding one. So I can always put a comment, which is pointy bracket, exclamation mark, 2 dashes, end of row. And I could even say first row, 2 dashes and a pointy bracket. And this means that only humans can read it. The browser does not read this. So that's actually quite handy. So if I look at this second div and scroll down, we can see the end of that one. So I could say, again, comment, pointy bracket, exclamation mark, dash, dash, end of second row, and I'm just doing this to keep things a little bit ordered for me. So we've got the div class equals row. I've clicked within that tag so it will underline its matching closing tag, and we can see it's a fair way down the page, but here we go. So I can say comment end of third row, and then we have our last row here, not our last, second last, so end of fourth row. And remember, the comment is pointy bracket, exclamation mark, and 2 dashes. I'll just hit save, and end of, and I'll just say footer row to make it nice and easy. Oh, hang on, that's the start of the footer row. What am I doing? Select that, cut. So I'm clicking within that row, and we can see the end one. So why is there one at the end here? That is the end of container. So we'll just label that end of container. And this just makes it easier for me to know where things are. Okay, now if we go and have a look at this, we'll probably not see any changes whatsoever because all we've done is just basically labeled where these rows are. So the next thing I want to do is add the mobile view, which is the easier of the layouts to code, because they're all going to have the same code. What we're going to do is we are going to say class equals col-12, and that just means it's going to be a column that is 12 of the Bootstrap columns wide, and that's all we're going to do for all of the columns in the mobile layout. The tricky thing is going to be identifying where those columns start and finish. So if I have a look at my layout that I proposed for the mobile device, effectively all of our columns are pretty much going to be 12 columns wide. So I'm going to do that to keep things nice and easy. We do have some that I've kind of sketched a little bit narrower, but I'm just going to keep it simple and keep them all to 12 Bootstrap columns wide. So remembering, of course, that all content has to be in a column, which has to be in a row. So our first column goes immediately after the start of this row, div class equals col-12. And then before the end div, which marks the end of the first row, we will say end div. And I'm just going to say end of column. There we go. I'll save that. We'll do the same with the next one. Div class equals col-12. Whoops, try and type that correctly. And then we go and find just before the end of the second row, we say end div. And I'm going to leave a comment saying end of column. Okay. Now if I quickly just jump out and have a look at this in the full page view, yep, nothing much has happened because this is the mobile layout, so that's absolutely fine. Okay, so we've got div class equals col-12. Okay, so we have our next row and we've got an image here. And remember, put the images in the row too. Don't forget about that. Don't think that it's only text. It's all content goes in the columns. So div class equals col-12. And then we have an image in this column. We have an H2 heading, an H3 heading, and some paragraph text. So it's only after the paragraph text that I put the end div. And I'm going to say end of first column, because I'm going to have 2 columns, remember. So immediately before I have any other content, I'm going to create my next column. Why is that? Well, because we need this image to be in a column as well. All of the content has to sit in columns. So I'm going to scroll down here, and just before the end of the third row, after the end paragraph, because remember we have to nest everything so it's within the other tags, we can't overlap them. I'm going to put my end div here, and I'm going to say with a comment it is the end of the second column, so that we know where those columns are starting and finishing. Again, we've got a row here, so I have to do div class equals col12. Now really I don't have to say col12 each time. I could just say col and it will figure it out, but this will make it easier for you to understand when we go to doing the computer view layout later, where we're going to be using all different numbers. This one will remind you which one the mobile one is. So we've got the div class equals col12, and that's the start of this particular column. We have an end div ending the 4th row, so we need to end that column as well. End of column. And it's just up to you if these comments make it easier or more difficult so that you can use those. Sorry, it jumped down. I think that's just my mouse playing up. You can use the comments. You don't have to use the comments. It just depends on what's easier for you. Now we're in the footer, so again we have to put it in a column. Look, it is jumping. That's annoying. Div class equals col12. Oh, it's jumping all over the place. Save. Apologies for this. I'm not sure why it's doing this. And then we will do another end div, comment, end of column. But the interesting thing at this stage is we've got 1, 2, 3 end divs in a row, and that's what you should see at the end of your document. There should be an end div to end the column, then immediately you have an end div to end the row, then you have the end div to end the container. So if you do see 3 in a row, that's perfectly normal. At the end of any normal row, you should see 2 in a row because you have the end of the column and the end of the row. So remember, that's at each row you see that. But if in your original design for the computer view, you have side-by-side columns, if I scroll up, we'll see that, then you should only have an end of column, because you're not ending the row, you're putting them side by side. This will make more sense next week when we do the computer view. In the meantime, I'm going to save this. I'm going to go to the full page view and we will see what the mobile layout is. It looks exactly the same, and you're probably thinking this is a whole lot of work for absolutely no purpose. But I'll show you one of the purposes we can apply to it in just a second when we add some backgrounds.